Speaker is Heather Smith, who will address the question of access for all in the historic environment. Heather's been access specialist for the National Trust for England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, Europe's largest conservation charity for the last 10 years. She provides advice on developing inclusive opportunities for employees, volunteers, visitors across the National Trust's diverse portfolio of historical houses, gardens, and parkland, holiday cottage accommodation, coastal areas, and more. She is a trustee of disability charities and has published a range of articles and chapters on accessibility and the historic environment, and has completed a PhD in the provision in museums and art galleries, thank you, for the blind and partially sighted people. Heather, it's up to you.
Okay, thank you. 12 minutes is not a lot of time. We're all planned to be presenting the conference. So I thought I'd mention points made yesterday about the historic environment at the start of the presentation to make sure that you have some takeaways as I dash through this session. So Anne Fry said that we don't want to destroy history to deliver accessibility. And that's true. We need to find sympathetic, creative and elegant ways to make the historic environment accessible. We have a responsibility for access for all. Marcus Weisen said that cultural accessibility is about accessibility of cultural experiences and context, not just pathways. And I apologise to Marcus because there is a pathway in my presentation, but I do agree with him that he talks so much sense about access to culture. And at the end of the session yesterday morning, the lady from ENAT said that conservation of heritage blocks access. It is a global task that requires a global response. But crucially, she also said we have the skills to do it. I hope conservation doesn't block access, but the balance is a challenge. And I hope that this summit helps the global response and to increase our skills. A major skill that we've heard a lot about already in the conference is to develop accessibility information. I'm not going to talk about that much in my session, but I think we all hold that thought with us as so many people have said it. It's also about working with disabled people and involving them in the decision-making as we adapt changes to our historic environment, and also understanding that the historical environment needs to live in the modern day. So, the National Trust portfolio. We've heard a little bit about the size of the portfolio in the introduction, but we own and care for over 28,000 buildings and structures, and I've put a list of some of the figures on there, so some different figures than we've heard in other parts of the conference. So 710 miles of coastline, 236 mansions, 12 lighthouses, 28 castles, 78 mills, 25 medieval barns, 61 pubs and inns, 57 villages, 5,000 cottages and 700 plus farmsteads. We've been around for 119 years and we've got one access advisor, which is me. So, a broad portfolio of diverse opportunities and very diverse challenges. I will say that those last three figures, all of those buildings there, or most of them, are not designed to have access to the public for visiting opportunities. They're more domestic dwellings, so I do slack off with some of those responsibilities there. But amongst our cottages, there are about 400 which are holiday cottages, so therefore designed to be used by tourists, both domestic and international. And so there we do have a responsibility to think about disabled people. I just put up some pictures there on the slide. The black and white building is one of our mansions in the northwest of England. That's Little Morton Hall, designed in the Tudor style. To the right, there's an example of coastline from the southwest in Cornwall, southwest of England. So we have a southwest coastal path, which we're responsible for developing access to. The bottom left is a red and white lighthouse, Souter Lighthouse in the northeast of England. Very difficult to develop physical access to our lighthouses, but we can use technology there. And we also have at the bottom right an example of one of our castles. Castles are not really designed to be accessible, but this is Croft Castle in the West Midlands, up on a hill for a start, and also ruined built stone. So very difficult to get up to as well as get round. Oops. And just a few more facts and figures. We have 4.2 million members. We look after 20 million visitors per year. We have 60,000 and more volunteers, 5,000 staff, and we are a registered charity, so we receive no government funding. So our funding model is based around income from our memberships, from our admission fees, but also the generosity of our volunteers giving their gifts of time to support our properties and to enable us to open them. Also benefactors, legators, fundraising applications for grants. We have to work very hard to continue to exist and to be open for all. So just some of the challenges there on that side of the picture. And we also have a motto, which is written through the middle of this circle, which is up on the screen, which is looking after growing the nation's love of special places forever for everyone. It's quite small type on the screen, but it goes through the middle. And a previous presenter in a session said that the feeling of for everyone was like a green light for access. And so that's what we have to remember. For everyone means everyone. Around the circle, there's to the left is improving conservation. We do have responsibilities to protect the historic environment. As I've previously said, we don't want to destroy it, but we do want to make it accessible sympathetically. At the bottom, it shows that we need the resources and skills to do that and to learn how we have this balance of preservation as well as opening up access. And to the right, it says engaging supporters. Crucially, we have to think about disabled people as our supporters because they are. And we need to understand when we talk about supporters, it means everyone. So we really need to work together to find the right solutions. I wanted to give you a little bit about the regulatory framework as well in the UK. The Equality Act 2010 is our overriding and overarching discrimination legislation. It replaced over 116 different documents which all had different facets and elements of protection against discrimination within them. When all that was amalgamated into one piece of law, the purpose from disability and access perspective remained that we have the concept of reasonable adjustments. So it's the balance. It's the balance of what's reasonable to do to the environment and what's reasonable to develop excellent access for disabled people in this context. I mentioned also here approved document Part M of the building regulations and the British Standard 8300, which give us our minimum standards that we're supposed to attain. And again, in the historic environment, we have challenges for that. So how do we become reasonable in our responses to those expectations? And I've also put at the bottom, there are other historic environment regulations. We have lots and lots of those, far too many to list. But we do have to balance the expectations of the Equality Act against the expectations of those regulations that are designed to protect and preserve the historic environment for all. So finding that balance can take some time. And to try and make a bit more sense of that legislation, I just wanted to use some screenshots of covers of publications. And I'm just going to focus on two with the constraints of time that we have. In the top, in the middle, there's a purple book cover, which is easy access to historic buildings. And in the bottom left, there's a green book cover, which is easy access to historic landscapes. These can be downloaded for free from English Heritage's website, and I can share that link with you in conference proceedings and also after I've spoken today, if you like. And these give some more information about the legislation that I've just spoken so briefly about, the regulations that we also have to abide to in terms of the building standards, but also some good examples of process and some good examples of the reality when all that thinking has been done and actions have been put in place. Ordinarily, I'd talk a lot more about sort of the methodology, but I don't have that time today in 12 minutes. But within those documents, there are examples of access strategies and thought processes to go through, and also the chain of actions that people take as part of a visit, which again stresses the importance of accessible information. So certainly worth a look, as are those other documents, which I can also provide links for. I just wanted to add in another slide about engaging supporters. It's so important. This is a slide of links to YouTube videos provided by the National Disability Authority of Ireland. And these give viewpoints of disabled people from different perspectives around their expectations and the realities of visiting the historic environment. So you'll have the links available for you. If you go into YouTube and just put in National Disability Authority Ireland, it will come up with these as an option. I would normally show one, but with the constraints of time today, I'm not going to do that. But it does give you some really good food for thought, I think, particularly for historic environment agency owners. So quickly, just to finish through on some case studies of how we put all that theory into practice. There are two images on the screen of Beningbrough Hall. Beningbrough is in Yorkshire, in the north of England. It's a Grade 1 listed building, which is our highest listed protected status. So we have to think very carefully about how we make changes to this type of structure. The image on the left and the image on the right both show some adaptations being made to a pathway. As I said, apologies to Marcus Weisen, there is a pathway in this. Cobbles are very difficult to navigate over. I think previous presentations have shown that. Here we got permissions to make interventions even in a Grade 1 listed environment because there was already partly a pathway. We just wanted to make it wide enough to enable wheelchair users to use it. Cutting a very long story very short, we were able to do that. This pathway leads, when it's completed, to a doorway. So this is an image of the brick building, the pathway in place, beautifully sort of looking the same sort of colour as the cobbles, but much more accessible, going across to the right-hand corner of the image to a doorway. And the doorway has some lighter coloured sort of cement around it, showing that there's been an adaptation there. The reason we got permission to do that was because that doorway was actually bricked up. We were able to reinstate an original doorway. So by looking at the history of buildings and the history of changes that have happened before we as an organisation took on caring for them, means that sometimes we can actually make what's actually a significant intervention just by really putting something back. That doorway led to a lift, which again is a major intervention to make into a structure. We were able to get permission to do that here because there was already an intervention inside the building. It was actually a 1960s series of toilets going up 3 levels of the building. We could resite the toilets somewhere else. We were able to do that and replace them with a lift shaft. Beningbrough Hall also has within it a collection of portraits from the National Portrait Gallery, so a very significant collection that we want everyone to be able to see. Prior to there being a lift in the building, there was a ramp around the other side of the building, through a conservatory. So it really wasn't very satisfactory or very elegant. It was really what we could do at the time whilst we thought about the next thing to do. So we were then able to introduce this lift. I just wanted to show an image. It's not a very elegant looking image, but it's the green metal casing that goes around the outside of the lift. One of the challenges of putting lifts into historic structures is they create a vibration and they can damage some of the way that the building is able to survive. So with this metal structure around the outside of the building, it protects the brickwork from actual vibration and therefore makes minimum intervention into the structure itself and minimum damage. So that's worked really, really well. And one of the pathways, just to really annoy Marcus, this is through the garden. The property didn't just think about access to the building, they thought about it around the garden area, improved their pathway and surfaces there. They also had significant thought into the interpretation in the building as well, thinking about use of different senses, thinking about opportunities of tactile and touch. They used some touch screens, some virtual interventions, all sorts of things to really speak to the business plan of access for all. And what's interesting is they actually saw a 50% increase in their visitor figures after they'd taken part in this project, which shows just some of the points that were made earlier, that it's not just disabled people that benefit from this change, it opens up opportunities for everybody. So very quickly, just on to a couple more case studies. The Giant's Causeway is a World Heritage Site on the Northern Ireland coast. I've just put an image up of it here with some of the hexagonal blocks. It's really a dramatic feature. This photo doesn't really do it justice. But when we were visiting there, this is an image of a white building. This was a visitor centre, very small, didn't tell the story, didn't really enable people who couldn't access the heritage site very easily to really get a sense of what they were going to see. So, cutting another long story short, we got permission to build a very modern intervention. So this is some black brick colonnaded columns. Colonnaded columns, you know what I mean. I'm rushing now, so I've got 1 second left. And so we're building on the sort of design of the causeway itself, but it's half a mile away. So it doesn't actually interfere with the actual site of the causeway in its own entirety. When you look at the building from a distance, there's a grey line there towards the middle at the top of the picture. That's actually what it looks like on the approach road. So yes, you can see it, but it's a sort of a palette, same neutral coloured palette around it. So trying very hard to make that modern intervention not too much of an intrusion into the environment. And because it's half a mile away, we introduced an accessible bus so that people can be transported down the main road, which takes you down to the causeway itself. To the bottom right, there's a changing places facility, which enables people with complex requirements to be able to use our toilet facilities, a campaign that's really gathering momentum in the UK at the moment, and they're excellent facilities, and we're trying our best to put them wherever we can. And inside the causeway, just very quickly, a look at some of the interpretation features, so different heights, touch screens, audio, subtitles, audio guides, use by school groups, etc., etc. Really thinking about using that internal modern building space to give people a real flavour before they then go and see the heritage site itself. And one final one, if I may just grab another 20 seconds. Snowshill Manor. This is a more traditional one of the mansions that I mentioned earlier on. Steps up to the entrance and all sorts of layers and levels inside. Very difficult to get permissions to make changes and actually to find the right change to make with the complexity of the interior structure. Worth a visit because it's absolutely rammed full of objects from all over the world. the owner of this property really wanted everybody who visited to be able to get a sense of all the visits that he'd made during his life. So lots of objects all crammed together, samurai armour, all sorts of things. So there, whilst we still struggle with the right intervention to enable physical access, we've gone for a digital option. So this is a tablet with a virtual tour. This slide shows that it's very portable. You can sit anywhere in the property or indeed outside the property and use it. So a gentleman using it on his knee. And the final slide is just to show that this is what the actual virtual tour looks like. Every image and every staff of the tour looks like this. All the buttons are uniform. Disabled people helped us develop the content. There's a panorama, there's audio, there's subtitles, there's different buttons to move around the different rooms. The full content of the manor is available digitally in this format. And this is also available on our website, and we're hoping to make even more of these available as we go along. There are around about 30 or 40 of these in place at the moment. Not an excuse to not make physical accessibility, but part of that whole opportunity of interpretation. And there are lots more examples, but I'll stop there.
Okay.